History is filled with men who seize power through fire and sword. They are loud, they are visible. Their conquests are marked by the roar of cannons and the fall of cities. But there is another kind of conqueror, one who moves in silence. John D. Rockefeller was this new breed of king. He did not need an army to build his empire. He did not need a crown to rule. His power was a different, darker force. It was the power of absolute control, built not on the battlefield, but in the quiet, calculating corners of the mind. He was a shadow, and his influence spread like ink in water, unseen until everything was stained. Rockefeller did not conquer lands, he conquered markets. He did not command soldiers, he commanded information. While others were driven by passion, greed, or pride, he was driven by something colder, something more profound. He mastered himself before he ever tried to master others. His face was a mask, revealing nothing of the intricate plans turning behind his eyes. In a world of chaotic emotion and impulsive action, his stillness was a weapon. Men would shout, they would rage, they would celebrate their small victories. Rockefeller simply watched and waited and planned. His patience was a predator stalking its prey, knowing the final outcome was already decided. He understood a fundamental truth that others missed. True power is not loud, it is quiet. It is not a sudden explosion, but a slow, deliberate pressure that crushes all opposition over time. He saw the world as a grand chessboard, and he was always 10 moves ahead. Other players would sacrifice their pieces in bold, reckless attacks. Rockefeller, however, saw the value in every piece, no matter how small. He moved with a precision that was both terrifying and beautiful. His strategy was a web spun in darkness, and his enemies would find themselves entangled before they even knew they were in danger. This was his art. This was his genius. He was not a mere businessman, he was an architect of power. The noise of the Gilded Age, with its booming factories and frantic speculation, was just a distraction. The real game was played in the shadows, in secret meetings, in coded telegrams, in ledgers where numbers told a story of silent domination. While others celebrated the illusion of freedom and competition, Rockefeller was building a cage. And he was building it so slowly, so methodically, that no one saw the bars until it was too late to escape. He was the king no one saw coming. Every weapon is forged in fire. For John D. Rockefeller, the fire was internal, and the weapon was his mind. From a young age, he was taught the harsh lessons of control and discipline. His father, a traveling con man known as Devil Bill, was a master of deception and emotional manipulation. He would make promises and break them, teach his son to be wary, to trust no one, not even his own blood. This childhood was not a warm, nurturing place. It was a training ground. It was a crucible that burned away the softness of youth, leaving behind a core of cold, hard steel. He learned early that emotions were liabilities, traps for the unwary. This upbringing created a man who was a fortress of silence. In business meetings, while his rivals blustered and argued, their faces red with emotion, Rockefeller would sit perfectly still. He would listen. He would absorb every word, every gesture, every flicker of weakness. His silence was not empty. It was active. It was a vacuum that pulled information from the air. People uncomfortable with the void he created would talk too much. They would reveal their fears, their plans, their secrets. They mistook his quiet for weakness, his stillness for hesitation. It was a fatal error. His mind was a ledger, recording every debt and every advantage. He practiced a form of radical self-control that bordered on the inhuman. Stories are told of him receiving a telegram with news of a disaster, a massive financial loss that would have broken other men. Rockefeller read it, folded it neatly, and placed it in his pocket. He then continued his meeting as if nothing had happened. There was no change in his expression, no tremor in his hand. This was not an act, it was his nature. He had trained himself to sever the connection between event and emotional reaction. This emotional emptiness was his greatest strategic asset, allowing him to make decisions with a clarity that his passionate competitors could never hope to achieve. This detachment was the source of his power. Emotion clouds judgment. Fear causes hesitation. Anger leads to mistakes. Rockefeller had none of these weaknesses. He was pure logic, pure strategy. He moved through the world of business like a ghost, unaffected by the chaos that swirled around him. He saw the world not in terms of right and wrong, or good and evil, but in terms of efficiency and control. His goal was not just to win the game, it was to rewrite the rules so that he could never lose. This cold discipline, forged in the pain of his youth, would become the foundation upon which he would build an empire. At the heart of Rockefeller's power was a secret philosophy, a dark art he perfected. We can call it cold alchemy. Ancient alchemists sought to turn lead into gold. Rockefeller's alchemy was far more profound. He learned to turn emotional emptiness into unbreakable power. While others were slaves to their feelings, their hopes, their fears, their passions, he emptied himself of them. This void was not a weakness. It was a source of immense strength. It gave him perfect clarity. It allowed him to see the world as a system of interlocking parts, a machine to be understood and then controlled. This was the first principle of his doctrine. Cold alchemy dictates that the greatest power comes from emotional neutrality. When you feel nothing, you can see everything. Rockefeller looked at the booming, chaotic oil industry and saw not excitement, but waste. He saw disorder. He saw inefficiency. Where others saw opportunity for a quick profit, he saw a system waiting to be dominated. His competitors were like gamblers, throwing their money on the table in a frenzy of hope and greed. Rockefeller was the house. He did not gamble. He calculated the odds with ice-cold precision and built a system where, in the long run, he could not lose. His lack of emotional investment was his ultimate advantage. This doctrine required absolute secrecy and meticulous planning. Rockefeller was a master of the hidden move. He created a complex web of companies, trusts, and secret agreements. His empire, Standard Oil, was like an iceberg. Only a small fraction was visible to the public. The true structure of his power lay hidden beneath the surface, a labyrinth of control that confused his enemies and confounded the law. He planned his campaigns with the detail of a general preparing for war. He gathered intelligence, identified weaknesses in his opponents, and then applied pressure, relentless, systematic pressure, until they either joined him or were crushed. The ultimate goal of cold alchemy is not just wealth, it is order. It is the transformation of chaos into a predictable, controllable system. Rockefeller believed he was bringing order to a wasteful and destructive industry. In his mind, he was not a predator. He was a savior. He was replacing the chaos of competition with the perfect, streamlined efficiency of a monopoly. This transformation from emotional man to a creature of pure strategy, from a chaotic market to a controlled system, was his life's work. He turned the lead of human emotion into the gold of absolute, unshakable power. To John D. Rockefeller, competition was not a virtue. It was a sin. In the new church of industry he was building, competition was the original sin, a source of waste, chaos, and inefficiency. He saw it as a destructive force that hurt everyone in the long run. Why should a dozen companies struggle against each other, driving down prices, duplicating efforts, and spilling resources? This was not just bad business, it was, honestly, morally wrong. A single unified system, managed with cold, rational efficiency, was the only logical path forward. This belief was the cornerstone of his empire. Standard Oil was not just a company, it was a crusade against chaos. With this conviction, he set out to eliminate his rivals. But his methods were not those of a common brawler. He preferred the quiet, suffocating pressure of a boa constrictor. His primary weapon was the rebate. He secretly negotiated deals with the railroads, the arteries of the nation's commerce. In exchange for his massive, predictable volume of shipments, the railroads gave him drastically lower prices than any of his competitors. Even more, they paid him a drawback on the oil shipped by his rivals. He was, quite literally, paid for every barrel his competition moved. It was a masterstroke of predatory genius. He made his enemies pay for their own destruction. His tactics formed a web of control that was nearly impossible to escape. If a rival refinery refused to sell to him, its access to transportation might mysteriously dry up. Its supply of barrels would become scarce and expensive. Banks might suddenly become hesitant to extend credit. Rockefeller rarely made overt threats. He did not have to. The system he had built did the work for him. It was a silent, invisible machine of coercion. Refiners across the country were given a simple choice: join the Standard Oil family and receive a comfortable income, or resist and be methodically ground into dust. Most chose to join. In a few short years, the chaotic landscape of thousands of small competing oilmen was transformed. In its place stood a single, monolithic entity, Standard Oil. It controlled nearly every aspect of the industry, from the well to the lamp. Rockefeller had achieved his goal. He had replaced the sin of competition with the divine order of monopoly. He saw himself not as a tyrant, but as a force for progress, bringing stability and low prices to the American public. But in achieving this order, he had forged a new kind of power, a corporate power so vast and so concentrated that it challenged the authority of the government itself. The empire of John D. Rockefeller did not die with him. It simply changed its form. In his later years, facing public outrage and government action, the great monopolist transformed into the great philanthropist. He poured his immense fortune into creating institutions that would shape the future. World-class universities like the University of Chicago, pioneering medical research foundations, and global health initiatives. On the surface, this was an act of generosity, a way of giving back the wealth he had accumulated. But beneath the surface, the old instinct for control remained. It was simply a new phase of his master plan. This philanthropy was not random charity. It was a strategic investment in shaping society itself. Just as he had brought order to the chaotic oil industry, he now sought to bring his version of rational scientific order to education, medicine, and culture. He funded systems. He built institutions designed to run with the same cold efficiency as Standard Oil. He was not just giving away money, he was embedding his DNA into the very fabric of the modern world. The hospitals he built, the research he funded, even the digital systems that trace their lineage back to the data-driven logic he pioneered, All bear the ghost of his desire for absolute, centralized control. His legacy is therefore a paradox. The man who was once the most hated monopolist in America is now remembered for the universities and hospitals that bear his name. But this is the final, most brilliant act of his cold alchemy. He transformed his public image from predator to savior. Yet the underlying principle never changed. Whether it was controlling the flow of oil or the flow of information and scientific progress, the goal was always the same: to replace chaotic, decentralized systems with a single, powerful, and centrally managed force. His philanthropy was simply monopoly by another name. The ultimate lesson of Rockefeller's life is a dark and powerful one. In the great game of power, the loudest voices and the most dramatic actions are often a distraction. True, lasting power is built in the shadows. It is built by those who master their own emotions, who plan with inhuman patience, and who understand that control is more important than credit. Rockefeller created the template for the modern, corporate, and institutional machine. He proved that the person who can remain cold, calculating, and unseen while others are lost in the heat of the moment will not just win the game, they will own the board.